I want you to picture a place that barely exists on a map.
Right.
We are talking about the village of Kazynet, tucked deep within the Siberian taiga.
Oh, it is incredibly remote.
Yeah, this isn't your typical small town. It is essentially just a scattering of houses sitting along a lonely, endless stretch of railroad tracks.
Just surrounded by an ocean of pine and birch trees.
Exactly. And the population, about 24 people.
Wow.
There are no shops, no proper roads, just these train tracks and dirt paths that seemingly lead to nowhere.
And we should mention the weather, because in August, the nights there are incredibly deceptive.
Oh, completely. The summer days might be fine, but the sun vanishes quickly and the sudden frost sets in. By midnight, it's the kind of freezing, pitch-black darkness that makes you feel entirely isolated.
It really sets a mood.
It does. And we're going to a very specific moment in that darkness. August 14th, 1989, at exactly 1:40 a.m.
It's the perfect setting for a mystery, but what we are exploring today is far from fiction.
No, it's very real.
Our mission in this deep dive is to look at a chilling event that begins as a gruesome discovery on those freezing railroad tracks. But it unravels into a massive, sprawling story of systemic corruption, of tectonic political shifts, and the relentless fight of grieving parents.
Absolutely. And today we are pulling from a fascinating stack of sources to tell this story. We are looking at declassified Soviet police reports, newly translated court transcripts, and the original desperate 1991 letter sent directly to Boris Yeltsin.
It's a goldmine of documentation.
It really is. So if you are a curious learner who wants to understand how the world actually works beneath the surface, you are about to see how one single incident can act like a magnifying glass, exposing the inner workings of an entire failing bureaucratic system.
That is the core of our analysis today. We are not just recounting a true crime story to shock you.
Right.
We are analyzing the mechanics of justice.
Yeah.
We want to understand how systems of law and order are supposed to function, and how, in isolated communities like Kazynet, they can completely break down.
So let's go back to 1:40 a.m. on that cold August night in 1989.
Okay.
Freight train number 2008 is rumbling toward the Kazynet station. The men driving it are two brothers, Vadim and Igor Sibernenko.
And they are experienced railroaders.
Very experienced. They know this route. But as they approach the station, their headlights sweep over something on the tracks.
Just a sudden obstruction in the dark.
Yeah. Vadim immediately sounds the horn and slams on the emergency brakes. But train 2008 was hauling 70 cars.
That is massive.
It's huge. Even hitting the emergency brakes the second the headlights caught the obstruction, physics dictates a massive overrun.
Right. The train is going to slide. There's no stopping that momentum.
Exactly. They hear and feel a horrific crunch beneath the steel wheels before the train finally screeches to a halt.
God, that's terrifying.
When the brothers climb down with their lanterns, expecting maybe a fallen branch or an animal, they find the torn remnants of 7 people.
It's an unimaginable scene for those conductors to walk into.
Truly.
And the victims were soon identified as 7 15-year-old boys from the nearby community of Mezdriches.
Just kids.
Their names were Dmitry, Nikolai, Vadim, Oleg, Vyacheslav, Roman, and Victor. They were a tight-knit group of friends who had simply gone out for a weekend trip into the forest to collect cedar cones.
Yeah, they were athletic, healthy, well-cared-for kids.
Just normal teenagers on an adventure.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the official police report that followed is staggering.
It really is unbelievable.
The local authorities swoop in and declare the whole thing a tragic accident. Their official narrative, according to the declassified files, was that the boys had intended to catch the 10:39 p.m. electric train home, but somehow they missed it.
Right, they missed their train.
And so, according to the police, these 7 healthy, smart kids just decided to lie down and take a nap together on the tracks.
It makes no sense.
Because nothing says a great place for a quick nap like active, freezing steel rails.
Which is absurd on its face.
Yeah.
Especially when you look at the toxicology reports in the source files.
Right, what did those say?
They showed 0 alcohol or drugs in any of the boys' systems. They were completely sober.
Wow. And then there's the issue of their belongings. The police found their backpacks perfectly lined up in a row, about 250 meters or 820 feet away from the bodies.
That perfectly arranged gear 250 meters away suggests deliberate staging.
Exactly.
It is not the actions of exhausted kids haphazardly dropping their bags before a nap.
No, not at all.
But the most damning detail came from the translated court transcripts of the train drivers themselves. The Supernenko brothers testified that in the moments before impact, the bodies on the tracks were completely motionless.
No flinching at the headlights.
None.
Yeah.
No waking up to the blaring horn of a massive freight train, no panic response whatsoever. They looked as if they had been placed there.
Which is a chilling detail.
Yet, despite all of this overwhelming physical logic, the authorities officially closed the case.
Which brings us to a grueling 2-year nightmare for the parents. They knew their kids wouldn't just nap on the rail.
Any parent would know that.
Right. But when they demanded a real investigation, they hit a solid wall of bureaucracy. They spent 2 years having doors slammed in their faces. Their phone calls were ignored.
Just entirely stonewalled.
The translated transcripts show just how often crucial paperwork was conveniently lost.
It wasn't just losing paperwork. It was an active, localized embargo on the truth.
Yeah.
The local authorities knew that reopening the case would expose their own initial, highly flawed investigation. The parents were left with no leverage and no local support.
So what did they do?
Well, grief is a powerful motivator. In the fall of 1991, they decided on a massive Hail Mary.
They bypassed the local officials entirely. They wrote a desperate letter directly to the president of Russia, Boris Yeltsin, begging him to order the investigation reopened.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the fall of 1991 is one of the most chaotic moments in modern history.
The Soviet Union is crumbling.
Yes, the entire geopolitical structure of the country is spiraling.
Right. Centralized communication is breaking down everywhere.
Exactly. Local municipalities were operating almost like independent fiefdoms because Moscow was too busy dealing with the collapse of an empire.
Right.
The odds of the president reading a letter from a handful of grieving parents in Siberia were virtually zero. It was like throwing a message in a bottle into a hurricane.
Yet, miraculously, against all conceivable odds, that letter found the right desk.
It's amazing.
On October 8th, 1991, the Prosecutor General's office officially reopened the case. And they didn't just assign local paper pushers. They sent 2 heavy hitters from Moscow.
Who were they?
Vladimir Guzenkov, an investigator for especially important cases, and criminal prosecutor Yuri Stolyarov.
These were serious men sent to handle a serious problem, but Vladimir had his work cut out for him.
Oh, definitely.
When he arrives in Kazynet, the physical crime scene is completely gone. Over 2 years of rain, snow, and rot had erased everything.
Not to mention what little evidence existed in 1989 had been mishandled or ignored.
Right. So Vladimir starts knocking on doors. He interviews the 24 locals.
Then what does he find?
A unified wall of silence.
Of course.
Every single person in a village where almost everyone is related to each other claims they were asleep. They know nothing. It's the classic closed community dynamic.
But Vladimir was persistent. He eventually found his first crack in that wall. He kept hearing whispers about a local man named Vasily.
And Vasily was currently serving time in prison, right?
Yeah, for murdering his own brother, a man named Slava. Initially, Slava's death seems like just a drunken brawl.
Tragic, but
Yeah.
not unusual.
Right. But Vladimir learned that before he died, Slava had drunkenly let slip details about what really happened to the 7 boys on the tracks.
So Vladimir goes to the prison. Over multiple visits, he slowly chips away at Vasily.
Just wearing him down.
Exactly. Vasily's story keeps shifting, but finally, a reluctant, partial confession emerges. He admits that he and another brother, Yuri, were involved.
But his story doesn't make logical sense, right? I mean, how did 2 thin, sickly men overpower 7 healthy, athletic teenage boys without a single one escaping?
It wasn't adding up at all. The logistics of the crime required more perpetrators or someone with significant authority.
So what does Vladimir do?
He makes a tough call. He asks the families for permission to exhume the boys' bodies.
And exhuming remains after 2 years in Siberian soil is an incredibly difficult process, both emotionally for the families and technically for the investigators.
It is. But that exhumation was the undeniable turning point in this investigation.
Because it revealed the truth.
When the forensics experts finally got a real look at the remains, the findings were macabre but definitive. The boys had not been killed by the train.
No.
They had suffered systematic, brutal, blunt force trauma before the train ever arrived.
The reports mentioned shattered jaws on both sides of the face, fractured skulls, and massive trauma to the chest and abdomen.
Yes. And to figure out exactly how those injuries occurred, the experts used what are called biomannequins.
I saw that in the source documents. For our listeners, can you explain how a biomannequin actually works in a case like this?
Sure. They are essentially synthetic models designed to perfectly mimic human bone and tissue density.
Oh, interesting.
Investigators use them to test the impact of specific weapons. By striking these mannequins with various objects, they can match the resulting damage patterns to the injuries on the victims.
And what did the biomannequins reveal?
They found that the wound patterns exactly matched specific heavy tools found in local railway depots, things like heavy metal pry bars and track wrenches.
So if the physical evidence proved it was murder by heavy railway tools, how did Vasily try to spin his confession to account for that?
He tried to blame the fatal blows on his dead brother Slava.
Well, convenient, right. Blame the guy who isn't around to defend himself.
Exactly. But Vladimir keeps pressing, breaking down the timeline, and Vasily finally drops a bomb. He blurts out another name, Nikolai.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because Nikolai isn't just some local railway worker.
Far from it.
He is a senior police lieutenant from a nearby village who happened to be visiting relatives in Kazynet that exact weekend.
Now the introduction of a senior police officer changes the entire complexion of the crime. Nikolai initially claimed he had an ironclad alibi, saying he left the village before the incident.
But Vladimir dug into that.
He did, and other locals contradicted him. Nikolai was there.
He had been seen drinking heavily with Vasily, his brother Yuri, and a local track foreman.
And that track foreman later broke under Vladimir's grueling questioning and confessed, bringing in the final accomplice, his own brother Pyotr.
Wow.
So you have a group of 5 men: Vasily, Yuri, the foreman, Pyotr, and Nikolai, the police lieutenant.
Let's reconstruct that horrific night of August 13th into the 14th based on these transcripts. These 5 men are sitting around in a house near the tracks, and they are consuming massive amounts of alcohol.
Over 3 liters of hard homebrew.
That is a staggering amount. Eventually, they run out of booze, and they are bored.
So they head down to the train station looking for yashas, which is local slang for train cargo handlers who might have a stash of goods for barter.
But there are no yashas. There are only the 7 boys waiting in the dark for their 10:39 p.m. train. The men are looking for trouble, and they need a justification, however flimsy, to start it.
They confronted the boys, falsely accusing them of trying to short-circuit the railroad tracks with a piece of wire to stop a train.
Which is ridiculous.
The boys, of course, knew the schedule perfectly and had no reason to do this, but the men escalated the situation violently.
Then the escalation came from the man who was supposed to uphold the law. According to the confessions, a confrontation breaks out, and one of the boys kneels, perhaps trying to defuse the situation or protect his friends.
It's heartbreaking.
Nikolai, the muscular, armed police lieutenant, strikes the boy in the head with the butt of his firearm. The blow is instantly fatal.
That moment of shocking violence froze everyone, including the other boys who couldn't process what had just happened.
You can't even imagine the panic.
But Nikolai didn't stop there. Realizing what he had just done and knowing he couldn't leave witnesses, he ordered the other men to finish off the rest of the boys.
It was a calculated command from the police officer.
Exactly. When some of the boys tried to run, Nikolai aimed his firearm at them and commanded them to stop, freezing them in place, again utilizing his authority as law enforcement.
While the other men grabbed railway tools and slaughtered them all.
Yes.
It is genuinely hard to wrap your mind around that level of cruelty. And then, the staging. Nikolai directs these men to drag the battered bodies across the tracks, laying them out deliberately.
He's cold and methodical.
Then he has them carry the boys' backpacks 250 meters away and line them up perfectly.
All to craft this twisted narrative of a tragic accident before the massive 1:40 a.m. freight train comes rumbling through to destroy the evidence. They did all of this, and then they just scattered into the night.
And this brings us to the grueling carousel of what we can loosely call justice.
If you can even call it that.
By 1995, 6 years after the murders, this case had national attention. The trial lasted 7 months. The verdict took over an hour to read.
And the results were severe.
Nikolai, the foreman, Vasily, and Yuri all received capital punishment. It felt like a monumental victory for the parents and a rare moment of accountability.
But the victory was snatched away almost immediately. In 1996, Russia makes a major geopolitical pivot. They are aiming to join the Council of Europe.
And a prerequisite for joining the Council of Europe is aligning with their human rights standards, which mandates the abolition of capital punishment.
Correct. So the first deputy chairman of the Supreme Court of Russia filed a protest asking to overturn the verdict to comply with these new international standards.
Which makes sense on an international diplomatic level. But locally, how did that affect this specific case?
Well, regardless of the intent behind the new international standards, the domestic legal framework wasn't prepared for the transition.
It was a mess.
The Supreme Court agreed with the protest, transferring the case for a new investigation. But because of the procedural chaos of implementing this new policy retroactively, the courts failed to secure a retrial in an organized manner. It created a massive procedural loophole.
allowing them to walk free on a technicality. The killers weren't just taken off death row. They were released back into society without a retrial.
They simply walked free.
And the aftermath of their release is dark. Almost immediately, accidents start happening.
Vasily attacks a cousin of his who supposedly knew too much about the night of the murders. Yuri, one of the convicted brothers, is found dead under mysterious circumstances.
Some reports say suffocation, others say sudden pneumonia.
And most chilling of all, a key railway worker who was a witness and had helped clear the tracks that night supposedly slips and falls under the wheels of a train right there in Kazynet,
The cover-up was continuing in broad daylight.
which highlights the sheer terror gripping that region. But what is truly remarkable is that the parents still refuse to quit.
Their resilience is incredible.
By the late 1990s, the country is dealing with war and massive corruption scandals, and everyone assumes the Kazynet case is dead, but these parents keep pushing.
In February of 1997, they forced the Prosecutor General's office to reopen the case yet again, under the premise of circumstances not fully investigated.
And this wasn't a quick fix.
No, it takes 4 more agonizing years.
Think about the toll that takes. They have to endure 3 more exhumations of their children. They sit through 5 different forensic reviews, and they have to listen to the testimonies of over 100 witnesses all over again.
And during this time, they have to watch Nikolai, the police lieutenant who orchestrated the entire massacre, parlay his freedom into a political career.
It's sickening.
He literally became a municipal deputy. He was holding public office while the parents of the boys he murdered were fighting for a retrial.
It is a staggering display of arrogance. But finally, in the fall of 2001, 12 years after the murders, the Supreme Court of the Republic of Caucasia issues a final binding verdict.
Nikolai, the foreman, and Vasily are found guilty.
However, the sentences were far from what the families hoped for.
Yeah, Nikolai and the foreman received just 10 years in a maximum security penal colony, and Vasily received only 7 years.
10 years for masterminding the slaughter of 7 children.
It's a bitter pill. So what does this all mean? For you, listening to this is not just a historical true crime case. It is a terrifying case study in the impunity of power.
Absolutely.
When a police officer can commit a mass murder, stage a cover-up, walk free on a procedural technicality, and then get elected to public office, it shows a system that isn't just broken, it's actively protecting the abusers.
This raises an important question about institutional and societal complicity. We cannot look past the town of Kazynet itself. We are talking about 24 people.
Right.
They lived practically on top of those tracks. They knew these men, they heard the screams, they knew the truth from day one. But they chose silence.
That silence was the fertile soil that allowed this horrific injustice to take root and grow for over a decade.
It really was.
And that is exactly where we want to leave you today. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. But before you go, I want you to mull over this final thought.
Something to really consider.
We saw how the push to join the Council of Europe in 1996 meant abolishing the death penalty, which inadvertently let these killers walk free for years. It made you wonder, how often does the sudden application of broad international human rights laws accidentally create procedural loopholes for the worst offenders of a previous regime?
It's a disturbing thought.
How many other criminals have slipped through the cracks simply because a local legal system wasn't prepared to adapt to a global standard? Keep digging, and we will catch you next time.